Okay, thanks everyone. This is my first time here at OSMC, so I'm just getting the lay of the land and figuring out how it all works and where I can find decaf coffee as well, because if I have one more coffee, I might explode. But yeah, so I work for Chronosphere, which is an observability vendor, as touched on by Andre's talk previously. So I agree with most of those points. I'd like to say we're a bit cheaper than most, but we can have a chat about that later. But today I'm here in my role as an open source maintainer for Fluent Bit. Just as a quick question, how many people have heard of Fluent Bit, use Fluent Bit? Okay, that's pretty good. Yeah, if you're running on a public cloud, you'll probably be using Fluent Bit as well under the hood. So what are we going to be doing today? So this talk is based on a talk I did at Cloud Native Rejects in Paris earlier this year. I did have a co-presenter then, but he could not make it to Paris or to this talk, but the Paris one we did present virtually as well. I think my talk got accepted at Cloud Native because I mentioned chat and people thought it might be about AI, but there's no AI involved in this talk at all. We're just going to talk about ChatOps. I'm going to discuss what ChatOps is, talk a little bit about Fluent Bit, give a little intro to it, but not really go into too much detail around that. I also want to highlight some of the telemetry pipelines, both that we do with open source and some of the stuff we do commercially as well. But I'm not here to sell anything. I'm not in sales. I'm not DevRel. I'm actually a DevOps engineer myself. So I came from a background of defense and then moved into DevOps. I've got a nice demo. Please don't judge it too harshly. It is very much a proof of concept, not a fully fleshed out application that you should deploy in production. We're going to talk about how we might extend or improve things. Particularly using some of the scripting support we've got in Fluent Bit with Lua scripting. I'm not going to touch on WASM and some of the other scripting support, mostly because I don't really understand it or do it. But we'll talk about Lua, and we'll talk about some of the fleet management stuff. And as an aside, so Phil Wilkins, my co-presenter on this talk in Paris, has written quite a few books for Manning about logging, about telemetry, observability in general. He's just published one that's come out recently, which is this one highlighted here. And the publishers have graciously given us both a discount code and 5 free copies to give away at this conference. So I'll be giving those away for good questions. Don't feel like you have to ask questions live if you come find me afterwards, but also some good pictures or stuff of me presenting as well would be a nice thing for me to get. And I've also got a talk just after lunch, so an Ignite talk as well on open source contribution. So, ChatOps, what is it? There's a lot of stuff there. We can talk about what it is, but mostly we're looking at improving Ops' kind of ability to respond in the same channel as you get an alert. So generally you might get dashboards with alerts on, then you have to maybe SSH into a node or mess about with things in a completely different channel. And so ChatOps is more about having that kind of Slack alert and then a response that actually resolves the alert. So that's the kind of idea we're talking about with ChatOps. We just took chat and ops and smashed them together. There's lots of things you could use it for. I'm just going to give you a little demo of it working. And part of it is to highlight the non-traditional use cases you might use for Fluent Bit as well. So a lot of people use Fluent Bit primarily as a log forwarder. That's what it started life out as. But I wanted to show you that there's lots of other stuff it can do if you kind of take this thing that's probably deployed in quite a lot of places already and maybe use it to do other stuff as well automatically. So Fluent Bit, what is it? So Fluent Bit is a CNCF graduated project. It's been around for quite a while. I've been working at Chronosphere since January when the company I was working at was acquired, and the founder of that previous company was the creator of Fluent Bit. So we spent quite a lot of time and effort working on both the open source side, but then also developing products based on it. Fluent Bit primarily runs pipelines of input to output, and it's vendor agnostic, so you're not, coupled, like Andre said, to your specific vendor. We can target different outputs. We support OTel as well. You can take you can take your existing pipeline of inputs with filters and parsers and whatever you've got in there and whack another output on. So quite often it's quite useful to be able to evaluate, okay, I'm using Datadog, maybe I want to send it to Loki or Elasticsearch or whatever, but I don't want to rewrite that whole pipeline and make sure everything is consistent and I'm comparing apples with apples rather than deploying another agent just to evaluate that vendor's particular functionality. So you can just add another output on there. We do other stuff as well. Commercially, people have done stuff like, okay, we're sending to our hosted solution, but maybe we want to send logs to cold storage and stuff like that, to seams, to auditing, those kind of stuff. So Fluent Bit is primarily written in C. It's made up of various plugins. They're called plugins because they're developed as plugins, but it's actually all compiled together as a single binary. You can load some custom libraries if you want to extend it and stuff like that. But fundamentally, it's slightly different to Fluentd, which has a more dynamic plugin loading mechanism at runtime. And yeah, there's a little bit about it. We can talk a little bit more afterwards. So this is sort of the traditional use case for Fluent Bit. Various sources, logs, syslog, Kubernetes events, Kubernetes logs, metrics, maybe some traces as well. Do some stuff with Fluent Bit and send it to all different destinations. So that's kind of the traditional use case. What I want to touch on is looking at reusing some of these sources and destinations to do different things. So we're going to use the HTTP input today to drive this kind of chat ops thing. So something's going to trigger Fluent Bit via HTTP, and then we're going to do some processing using Lua scripting to do some side effects that we want to see happen on a node. And then we're going to use the Slack output as the chat ops destination. So that's there. So how will we use Fluent Bit? So the idea is you're running Fluent Bit on all your nodes. It's sending your log somewhere. It's already installed. I don't need to go around and do stuff. The demo is going to kind of show you a little dummy alert where we're saying, we've detected one of your files has got the wrong permissions. We kind of worked around with a few things we could do in the demos. We had like file permissions, disk space too full, lots of like trivial things that potentially you could fix by SSHing in. We're going to send this alert to Slack. And then my co-presenter put together a little Java monitoring program for the Slack webhooks. So when we write to Slack with Fluent Bit, it's going to monitor for responses and send that response back to Fluent Bit. You could potentially do that in lots of different ways. The code's all in the repo I'll show you shortly. But the idea here is this is kind of just a little helper to monitor those Slack webhooks and send them back to you. And how will we use it? So here we can kind of see the chat ops approach. You can tell I'm in dark mode with all my screenshots. But the idea is like we can get an alert, we can talk about it, discuss it. We're having an incident, blah, blah, blah. What should we do? And then we're going to fire it back. Fire back some kind of resolution to do to the node. In this rather insecure example, what the Lua script that we're going to invoke does is essentially lets you run a script on the node with the same name as that final bit of the response. So we're saying, fire this to such and such node and tell it to run this script. Now, you probably shouldn't do that in production, run arbitrary code through random webhooks. So this is just for the demo. I can, when you look at it, you can probably extend it to do different things, and we'll talk about some of those hopefully as well. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of the demo, and hopefully we can show it now. The demo is all up in the Fluent organization, so it's all completely public. You can find it right now. I've got some links at the end as well. Right. So can everyone see that okay? Everyone's okay at the back? Yep, cool. Let me just show you what the demo looks like. I'll probably have to jump out of that. So this is the repo. I mean, we won't go through it. I'll let you read it all. There's some helpers there. The main thing is we've got the actual Fluent Bit config in here where we can kind of see what we're doing. So we've got an HTTP input. We're generating alerts. This is what we're going to use for the demo because, just to keep it simple and not have too many moving parts to fail in a live demo, we're just going to trigger a dummy input. We've got the ops stuff, which is essentially reading what the Lua script does, the actual Lua script when you tell it to do something, and then the Slack responses and the HTTP output to trigger the web server. This is the Lua script. If you guys are interested, you can kind of have a look at it. Essentially, what it does is take this thing that you've passed back, strips off the command, and runs it. So we've got a couple of examples here where we've got like fixed permissions, and all that does is chmod the file. And I've also got a compose stack to run it all. Here I'm using our LTS image just for, publicity purposes. It should work with anything with a shell because we're using OSMC. So to touch on that as well, with Fluent Bit, the runtime image doesn't have a shell. It's based on distroless. So if you're using the default runtime image from open source, this probably won't work, just because it hasn't got a shell. And then we've got the source code for basically the web server that gets triggered to monitor the Slack conversation. So yeah, that's everything there. Okay, so if we run this up, hopefully everything's good. Let me open up the Slack thing as well. Ignore these super secret conversations. There we go. So that was the one I ran up just before we started the presentation. This is the kind of error we've just got. You can kind of see it go out in the debug, but I think it probably got lost somewhere up there. So we can talk about doing some stuff. And until we give it a specific command that triggers the web server, we won't get anything happening. So we're saying, right, we've had a discussion, talked with Phil, there's some earlier ones as well, which we used in the actual thing. Now, turns out we need to fix the permissions on this specific node. So looking at the compose file, you could actually extend it with more than one node. We're using containers to simulate nodes here, so it makes it nice and ephemeral and easy for demos and stuff like that. So I tell it to do that. Off it goes. Here we go. So we've received it on the Fluent Bit side. We've figured out the command we should be running. It's run it, and we get some kind of response. So there's part of the Fluent Bit config was to capture the response of running the Lua command. So say if you gave it the wrong thing to do, it would explode and tell you some debug, and you could send that back to Slack as well. In this case, we've done the right thing. I might show it doing the wrong thing later, once I've finished. But yeah, we've sent a success notification back to just say, look, everything worked, we're good, the problem is resolved. So that's just the demo in a very quick couple of minutes. I'm happy to dive into it later on as well if people want to come find me, or even just at the end of this in questions. Right, good, back to that one. So, mostly to remind me about the architecture. The main thing here is we're using the normal HTTP input and the Slack output, but with some custom Lua scripting. So the Lua scripting lets you do quite a lot of cool stuff. In this case, it's a filter, but we don't actually filter any data. We're just using it to generate side effects that are like fix the node or do stuff like that. I've used it in other ways previously. You can use the dummy input as a timer to trigger the Lua filter to do other things. So potentially you could do all the Slack monitoring, all that stuff as well with the Lua filter, but I didn't have time to put all that in a nice simple Lua script to run in a demo. But that's an option as well. There's some examples of stuff we might want to use this on. I've covered a few here. They're kind of some possibilities of problems we might see. So say you've got auto-scaling in your cluster, you don't want it to go crazy if someone starts denial of service attacking you or some other reason. So having some kind of Slack notification where Fluent Bit can say, oh, you've got X number of nodes, are you sure you want to carry on scaling, or should we do something else? Monoliths, legacy stuff can be an issue as well. If you're auto-scaling, particularly in microservices, you might want to wait for that to spin up. It's quite easy to bugger up your config in lots of different ways, so you might need to manually do scaling. And again, that's another chat ops thing. And then data science was the other thing I was thinking about. Generally speaking, they want to do stuff when the cluster is free. So HPC stuff, things like that, you potentially can get a notification saying, no one's doing anything right now, who wants to do something next and what is it? And potentially you could do that way. There's lots of ways of doing it. This was mostly like showing you could do it with Fluent Bit, potentially as something that's already installed in your platform. Okay, what next? So this was just a simple POC. We've touched on that a few times, I think. The idea here was just to try and give people ideas about how you could sort of bastardize and reuse existing agents you might already have in your cluster to do other things. So you've got observability agents in there. They're observing stuff. Maybe they can resolve stuff as well. So probably good examples of that are like the eBPF agents you're starting to see roll out. I know Falco, for example, has recently started adding enforcement stuff and things like that. Tracy and Falco actually talk fine to Fluent Bit. I implemented the Tracy support for Fluent Output, so you could potentially use those to generate events and then do stuff back with very simple eBPF stuff as well. There's lots more stuff we want to do. It's very useful for ops. As being the person who's been woken up a few times by pages and stuff like that, not having to go dig out your laptop and SSH in and being able just to do very simple, trivial fixes using Slack or using your mobile is a joy. Particularly maybe if you're out at the pub and you suddenly get an incident and then you have to go home and fix it, but you can't really see straight and stuff like that. So there's things like that you might want to consider as well. But also it makes it a lot more flexible. It allows people to do on-call without maybe the huge overhead that it imposes on people's lives. So it's quite important. But we also want to kind of extend it a little bit. How do you know it's working? What is it doing? Do you want some kind of authentication, verification, those kind of things? And also like collaboration as well. So a lot of this stuff is something to add to the demo or to whatever solution you're going with out there. I'd just say, ChatOps is quite a nice thing. It won't do everything, but if you can run incidents that are trivial, turn it off and on again, stuff like that, then hopefully, it will save time and effort. And it limits all the noise you have when you're having an incident. Where do I look? What do I look at? How do I fix it? Well, what am I supposed to be doing? Those kind of things. If you can keep it all in one place, it's really useful. We run our instance through Slack channels, so it's quite useful to have a Slack bot that helps you with those incidents as well. So I was going to touch on some of the Lua stuff. I don't know if anyone's used Lua before. Roblox uses Lua. Quite a few other things use Lua. Some switches use Lua to customize things. There's lots of places that use Lua. It is an interpreted language, but we use a Lua JIT engine to compile it down and run it very performantly in Fluent Bit. And you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. I just wanted to show you, this is sort of the open source sandbox we provide, which kind of gives you some logging and lets you see what the output is of the filter you're applying, which is really quite useful. In the past, I've done other stuff with Lua at previous companies, and we sort of implement it now as well commercially. You can do redaction and stuff like that. Adding context to your data is very useful as well. So you've got 1,000 clusters, 25,000 nodes. You get a log from one of them. How do you know which cluster it is, what node it is? You can kind of annotate that information when you send it through Fluent Bit. So this is this cluster, there may be some extra useful information. You can downsample, aggregate it, remove all the noise, as we were saying about when you're doing logs, a lot of logs is noisy. So maybe just remove the stuff that is noisy before it even leaves the cluster. And that's one of the things that we put together with our telemetry pipelines. So this is something my previous company, before it was acquired by Chronosphere, put together, and now we're sort of building on more and more inside Chronosphere. So yeah, we built on top of Fluent Bit, and generally we try and push these changes back, but we're sort of focusing on like if a particular customer needs a certain aspect, implement it and provide it for open source, and then we can keep using it. So yeah, we've also got fleet management in there. So that's I don't know if people know what fleet management is. It's can be a bit of a random buzzword, but it's essentially if you've got lots of agents deployed on your nodes, point-of-sale devices, laptops, whatever they are, you want to roll out a configuration for all of those to use. So centralized control of those management of those agents. And again, that's where maybe the chat ops kind of stuff, look, you've got this agent on the node, it's telling you something's wrong with the node, also get it to fix the node. And you could plug that into AI, and maybe it'd do it all for you, and no one needs to be involved, and it'd be great. But yeah. So I've got a little demo. This is some of the stuff. Oh, it's a bit out of date because I obviously did these slides before we got acquired. But this is the more funky version of the Lua sandbox. We've got a lot of different actions, custom actions we put together for people to, drag and drop and easily build up pipelines and stuff like that. I talked about it before, that hashing was a really good and important one I've used in the past. It's quite useful in logs to be able to redact information, but if you're trying to track something, you also need to correlate that information. So if you hash it, so it's fundamentally, removed, but then you can correlate it across different logs and stuff like that. And stuff like credit card, numbers and stuff like that, you probably want to remove and things like that. There's also, aggregation rules, downsampling, all these kind of things as well. And this all runs on your infrastructure as well. So this is not running in our hosted Chronosphere environment or anything like that. So it's a good way to say if you've got an expensive like Splunk Datadog output or something like that, maybe you can downsample a lot of the noise in it to just give you the important stuff, which is really useful then to push on to those data management and observability platforms. If you want to have a go, there's some public sort of sandboxy demos you can just have a play with and mess about. I've put the link up there for people to have a quick look at as well. But yeah, so that was a very quick run through my presentation. As I say, there's a discount code there for 45% off all Manning products until December the 4th. I've also got 5 free copies of things for questions and other stuff. But I know, for me personally, I find it quite difficult to ask questions live. So if people want to come attack me afterwards with questions and stuff like that, I'm more than happy to chat to them. And also chat about any kind of open source Fluent Bit and things like that. And after lunch as well, I have an Ignite talk about encouraging contribution to open source. So please come see that too. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. You already heard there are books in it for asking questions and asking them
taking
here.
pictures? Taking good pictures of me?
Yeah, we can also take good pictures of you maybe. Yeah. So let's start with the questions though.
Yeah.
Yeah, very great talk, very nice talk. Thank you so much. Yeah, I know it's.
Yeah.
So I have actually a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So there are yeah. So one is like around the idea of chat ops. How is it different from an AI assistant? And looking a bit in the architecture itself, normally we kind of distinguish the AI assistant like, being plugged to a vector database, working with retrieval augmented generation, some external resources. Does ChatOps, in your example, replaces this or, has a different architecture because of the Lua, like, getting all the scripts, all converting the HTTP input into scripts? If you can,
I can
translate a bit that, and then I have another question.
Okay. Right. Okay. So my example, please don't take it as the canonical. This is the way to do chat ops. It was very much just let's publicize Fluent Bit and maybe some of the Lua processing, which people don't maybe not be aware of. For me, certainly for chat ops, I'd expect AI or some kind of helpers to be in the loop there. You've got runbooks, you've got a lot of other stuff as well that you need to deal with. Maybe you could train it a little bit so it could, it sees an alert and it suggests, oh, you might want to run such and such command or something like that. I think you'd still need someone in the loop to actually go, yeah, that's the right thing to do and stuff like that. But I wouldn't expect it to change any of that. I think it's more about enabling and speeding up response in just a single channel rather than replacing an entire, way of doing things and stuff like that. It might be you get an alert and it's like, it's impossible to resolve that in that channel, you know. But hopefully some of the more trivial stuff we can do when we're at the pub, when we're half awake, those kind of simpler changes as well. And I think incident management is a hard discipline, and there's a lot of stuff going on at the same time and a lot of stress, and if you can simplify any part of it, you should. So that's where I'd probably see it.
Yeah, cool, thank you so much. I mean, I could chat with you about this later.
Yeah.
And the second question was around the Fluent Bit part. How is it different from OpenTelemetry? How does it, stand out?
So I think there's two things. There's OTel, the standard, and there's OTel, the implementation. I think you're asking about OTel, the implementation, OTel collector, those kind of things. It's older. It supports a lot more inputs and a lot more outputs. It doesn't necessarily support every single thing the OTel collector does right now, but we're working on adding that because that's the way stuff's moving, and that's kind of what our customers want and stuff like that. It's quite useful. OTel's great. Lots of enterprises are not using OTel, cannot use OTel in any time in the near future, or have sources, destinations that will never be OTel. And it's quite useful in those stuff to like combine all these different sources, maybe send them out via OTel or something like that. Similar to what Andre was saying, get all your proprietary agents to talk to talk OTel. Well, why not replace them with a CNCF open source agent that talks OTel but can handle maybe those input formats. So yeah, so Fluent Bit does support OTel, the standard, but OTel the collector is an implementation thing. I personally see a lot of fragmentation in OTel the implementation. It feels like it's maybe following some of the problems that previous standards with the OMG had. Corb is a good example where I've had to fight with in the past, DDS as well, where you're getting these kind of, we have a standard, but then we have a fragmented ecosystem of agents that conform to that standard. Now, Fluent Bit is another one of those agents, but we're under the CNCF and we do support it as much as we can, but we also support a load of other things as well. So I think that they're different use cases for different things. Anecdotally, we can probably share some benchmarks, but never trust other people's benchmarks. Benchmark it with your stuff. Fluent Bit uses a lot less resource. There might be a slight increase in latency depending on what you're doing, but it's a lot more performant. And a lot of people are using it. So rather than deploy the OTel collector as well, maybe we can use Fluent Bit. So that's kind of what I'm trying to publicize on the OTel side as well. But I'm not an OTel expert, so don't take my word as gospel. Please check for yourself.
Any more questions on Fluent Bit?
There's one at the front.
Front row, perfect.
I had two questions. One was
You only get one book. Yeah.
Of course. One was answered right before me.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. The second is, do I understand it correct that Fluent Bit does similar things like, for example, Cribble?
Yeah. So the Cribble agent functions in
Competitive.
Competitor, I guess, is kind of what it was. So Fluent Bit, that was one of our, in my previous company, that was kind of our main competitor, was like we're competing with the kind of Cribble. So they do fleet management, they do pipelines and stuff like that.
Similar.
Yeah. So, but we're open source.
Of course.
Yeah, and not subject to lawsuits yet.
So it's blank, no?
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We still got time. If there are questions you want to ask.
I know it's lunch though, so yeah.
Okay.
Come find me after as well, please, and we can have a chat too.
Okay. So, as Patrick already mentioned, there will be lunch next, served from 1 p.m. in the front of the building, the hotel's restaurant. So see you all there. And let's say thank you again to Patrick for his great talk.